I haven't forgotten your letter to me too, asking for information about how things were when I was in a city, when I was a boy, and what it's like in a big city, or what it was like in a big city in those days. In 1907, we moved to Newark, and we lived until 1912 on Astor Street, which means nothing to you. And just below us was Mulberry Street, which crossed Astor Street. And the type of trolley car that is mentioned first in the article is the one with the great, just the four wheels right in the center of the car, and the front and back end bobbing up and down, was the Mulberry Street line in Newark. It's the last one like that. The others had much more modern equipment, but they still kept that equipment on the Mulberry Street line, with also that great big brass handle which used, I think it must have been a mechanical brake. All the other trolley cars had air brakes, Westinghouse air brakes. Although when I was a kid, that was the area from which people were moving into better sections. The first generation here, or the second generation of the family. But there was the Irish section and the Ironbound, and there was a Polish section. There was a decidedly German area. A couple of them, actually, where the German people settled. They were your principal immigrant groups, the Irish, and then later the Italians. But as the generations prospered, they got away from that kinfolk thing, and they moved into other areas and mixed up with each other. But that was the big fact of life, that in the 19-teens, the 1890s, 1880s, you stayed pretty much with your own people. It was a very bigoted area as far as the time, as far as the Catholics were concerned. The ads in the papers for help always wanted a young man, white, Protestant, and then they were declined to state the other requirement. So the Catholic had a much more difficult task to get in getting a job. And then, of course, there were organized groups who made a fetish of anti-Catholic actions and speeches and writings and so on. So we didn't have it too easy. And you pretty much mix with your own kind. I mean, with the I'll give you one more story on that. The very first job I ever had, well, I caddied for a man, and he apparently liked me. He had I wouldn't call it a wholesale jobbing business in New York, where he sold to retailers socks, as I remember. He had this showroom with these trestle tables and full of little boxes in which, he displayed his stuff and did very well, I'm sure. And as I say, I caddied for him. I did hear him make remarks about priest lovers and all that sort of thing. But I didn't pay any attention to it. Now, the guy must have liked me, or he wouldn't have given me a job. I was only 13. And we needed it. World War I had just started. The cost of living had gone up. My father's income hadn't. And we could have used, the money from my job. And anyway, on Wednesday of the week that I worked there, the bookkeeper came up and asked me what my religion was, and I told her Catholic. On Saturday, she brought up my check and said, "We won't need you any further." So I had a date with my mother. We were going to have lunch and some kind of a little celebration. So that sort of put a quietus on that. And the next day, almost, I got a job with the Heller, H-E-L-L-E-R, File, F-I-L-E works in North Newark. They made industrial type files. By that I mean rasps, R-A-S-P-S, that kind of a file. And my job was to stand in front of an emery wheel and with the seconds, the ones that had imperfections, and rasp off the name of the manufacturer so they could sell them as seconds without the manufacturer's name on it. And that was my job for the rest of that summer. My mother never knew actually what I did, because it was a tough one. I had to go all the way across town by car. I worked 5 hours, a half hour for lunch, and then 5 more hours, 10-hour day. So that was an introduction. I was a kid. 7 to 12, 1 to, what would that be? 1 to 7 to 12, 12:30 to 5:30, I guess, because it was 10 hours. And then I had to take a trolley car home all the way across the city from the fireworks, which were in the north end of the city, to the Weequahic Park Station where I live, which is the south end. I guess that was the worst experience I had personally. And I can still remember the job, and I can still remember a young man who was my foreman who was ugly to me, but somehow kept me on. I don't know why. He seemed to resent me. And one day he asked my age, and I told him I was 14, and he said I was a liar. I was 17 at least, so I must have looked old. Maybe I aged on the job, I don't know. Then I got a job for 2 years working as a grocery clerk after school. We had chain stores then, but they sold over the counter. You waited on people, and if they asked for a pound of sugar, you bought them a package with a pound of sugar in it, put it on the counter. And they had special wrapping paper, and you'd write in pencil, and heavy pencil, the price of each item and add it up, just in your own head. So I got good at addition that way. And then you'd wrap it up neatly, and there was a little wooden handle that you would put on the package. They'd tie it with twine. There's a little wooden handle that you'd put on the package, and you went out. It was a very neat package to carry out, and people carried home their own groceries that way. Now, nothing was sold really in bulk, except some cookies, possibly, or, in fact, they did sell cookies in bulk, and things like sugar and flour, which we, however, prepackaged in the store, weighted up and sold 1 pound packages, in bags, and butter, and lard, and cheese, and margarine. And it was an interesting experience. I enjoyed it. You visited with everybody in the neighborhood.